The mountain state is full of monsters, none of which are more famous than the Mothman of Point Pleasant. It all started on November 12, 1966, with a town over in Glendinning. Gravediggers were working late into the night as they saw a large form take off from a thicket of trees. They swore it wasn't just a big bird. It looked like a man with wings. After that, the Mothman was seen numerous times at different places throughout West Virginia. Most of the sightings seem to occur in and around an old munitions factory called the West Virginia Ordnance Works, or as the locals called it, the TNT. The TNT area was overgrown and dotted with storage buildings made of concrete and dozens of abandoned tunnels. It was also in the 1970s said to be so polluted that it could be labeled a disaster site. This actually ties in with the local legend as to what the Mothman's origins are. Some people believe that the Mothman was actually a bird mutated by the chemical runoff from the plant. Now, this theory doesn't really hold much water since no chemical used in the creation of gunpowder has been known to cause genetic mutations, and not one that could be so rapidly onset. However, there are those who believe that to this day. It was in the TNT area that the closest look anyone has ever had of the Mothman happened. On November 15, 1966, 4 friends, Roger, Linda Scarberry, Steve, and Mary Millette, had no idea that what they would come across that night would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As accounts go, it was Linda who spotted the creature first. She saw a pair of glowing red eyes further up the road. When the headlights washed over the creature, they all stared in shock. Over 7 feet tall, it stood on 2 legs. Its body was covered in a gray-brown hide, its wings folded. Many who have claimed to see the Mothman state that it makes them feel overwhelmed, as if it gives off a sort of malevolent force. Some even become sick from it, the illness lasting several days. They turned their car and sped away, and they panicked as the monster gave chase. It rose up into the air with a 10 to 15 foot wingspan and followed right along with the car, which was supposedly going 100 miles an hour. After that, there were dozens of sightings, even a few encounters of the men in black. Everything seemed to come to a head with the collapse of the Silver Bridge, though. On December 15, 1967, the suspension bridge collapsed and killed 46 people. Many claim to have seen the Mothman flying over the bridge just before it collapsed. After the tragedy, the sightings mysteriously stopped. There's been a photo circulating around this case for years, which at first glance adds some credence to the Mothman being at the scene of the bridge itself, but on closer inspection, it's just another part of the bridge. Now, there have been tons of theories as to what the Mothman actually is. A sandhill crane, an owl. However, it seems a little hard to confuse an owl with a 7-foot-tall human-like creature. There is, however, another odd connection between West Virginia's Mothman and that of Cornwall, England's Owlman, which was seen in 1976. The two sound nearly identical in terms of appearance, and with the time frames so close together, it wouldn't be a stretch to think that they might be one and the same. The fact that they're seen so far apart could play into the idea of migration. Something that did stand out to me was the long-held belief by people in and around Point Pleasant that the area suffers from a curse. Legend has it that a Native American chief called Cornstalk was murdered near where the town stands today. He was killed along with his children in an act of betrayal and cursed the land. My take on the Mothman is one of hope. The creature itself ended up breathing life back into the town of Point Pleasant after the book The Mothman Prophecies and the movie by the same name came out. The little town used the monster to put itself on the map and have become a mecca in the cryptozoological scene. While sightings have all but died out, in one town at least, the hope that something is out there is still strong. The Dover Demon was first sighted in the 70s by one teen late at night. Bill Bartlett, our sole witness, Mike Mazoka, and Andy Brody were all cruising down Farm Street in Dover, Massachusetts, when Bartlett noticed something creeping around the beam of his headlights. He goes on to describe the creature as having eyes like two orange marbles, a large head on a thin, lanky body with long hands and feet, a baby's body with long arms and legs, Bartlett would go on to say, and only around 4 feet tall. Neither Mike Mazzoka or Andy Brody claimed to have seen the monster, and many who knew Bill Bartlett weren't sold on the idea that he couldn't have just made it up. Then another sighting occurred on the very next night. On a dimly lit road, John Baxter found himself being approached by a small figure. He just left his girlfriend's house. It was around midnight, and the only person he thought it could be was a friend of his who lived nearby. Baxter called out, but the figure did not respond, just continued walking towards him. Suddenly, it stopped. When Baxter once again didn't get a response, he moved towards it and the small form darted off into a wooded area. Baxter gave chase, and in a short run found it standing in a rocky outcrop. Its feet seemed as if they were molded to the stone, and its two lightly colored eyes looked straight at him. The creature's oddly shaped head began to make him feel more than a little unnerved, so he beat feet out of there until a car picked him up at the intersection of Farm Street, the same street Bill Bartlett claimed to have seen the creature. Now, explanations abound. Some say it is a calf, which is possible, there's ample farmland around, or a baby moose, which is pretty unlikely since moose aren't found in the area. Others have ventured an escaped helper monkey that lost its hair due to some infection like mange, which is kinda laughable. Then there are others that think the Dover demon is in fact an alien due to the slight similarities with abductees' depictions of greys. The theory that I find most intriguing, however, comes from Native American mythology. The Cree Indians believed in a water spirit called the Minagashi, which they say had a head with no nose and was very thin with long arms and legs. Other tribes had similar creatures in their beliefs with varying descriptions. Some were hairy, for example, but all the legends had the common thread of the Minagashi being attached to the water in some way. They were often said to flip canoes over and drown unwitting people. That, the connection to water, and the descriptions are what sum me on the Dover demon maybe being this Native American creature. Farm Street, as well as Miller High Road, where Baxter first started his encounter, are crossed by parts of Trout Brook, which feed smaller ponds and lakes near the encounter site. They are literally surrounded by water. Thanks for listening. Stick around with that subscribe button. If you enjoyed yourself, feel free to leave a like. It really does help. You can follow me on Facebook and all the usual places in the description. See you next time. You know, making clothes the old-fashioned way was really a pain. Remember going out into the fields and pulling down the fresh lambs growing from tall stalks and shearing them? What? You don't remember that? Surely you remember opening up the long pods to check on the naked baby lambs inside for next year's harvest. No? Then you must not have had a Lamb of Tartary. Dating well before the 16th century, this fascinating little cryptid was documented in Central Asia. The people there claimed the creature was both an animal and a plant. Its life cycle started as a tall stalk, which acted like an umbilical cord to the soil. Pods would then grow, filled with naked lambs, and soon they would reach maturity at the very top of the stalk. There the Lamb of Tartary would sway back and forth to eat the grass around it until the food was gone. Without grass to eat, it would die of starvation. The locals would then come to shave it and drink its honey like blood. In 1887, a writer named Henry Lee caused a stir with his book, The Vegetable Lamb of Tartary. The book sparked a debate on what parts of the creature were animal and what parts were plant, and ultimately listed the cryptid as a fable for the cotton plant, reasoning that the local people had no idea of cotton, but knew well that wool came from sheep. There is also a strong connection between the Lamb of Tartary and a Jewish myth called the Yedawa. The Yedawa was said to be a sheep that grew from the ground up by a long stalk, and only by severing the stalk could the Yedawa be killed. Its bones were then said to be used in religious divination. Stories about the Yedawa were sometimes very violent. The creature was said to sometimes swing down from the stalk and snatch people up. My thoughts on this strange creature are pretty mixed. I agree that it was most likely an allegory for the cotton plant, but the strong connection between the Lamb of Tartary and the Jewish Yedawa give me pause. It seems pretty odd that something from Central Asian myth could show up almost perfectly mirrored in old Jewish folklore. Thanks for listening. Stick around with that subscribe button. If you enjoyed yourself, feel free to leave a like. It really does help. You can follow me on Facebook and all the usual places in the description. See you next time. Here we have a strange case out of Italy of what may very well be the first recorded encounter with what people commonly refer to as reptilian aliens. If not the first, then the most widely known at the time. It all started one night in 1978 at the village of Torgiglia. Pier Zanfretta was simply making the rounds on his security route when he made it to a currently empty home of one of his clients. All of a sudden, the lights and engine of his car died. As he was looking around, he noticed lights coming from the house and assumed that the home was being burgled. So Zanfretta, with gun and flashlight in hand, decided to sneak around to try and surprise the criminals. However, it was him that would be surprised that night, and the shock would change his life forever. Something touched him on the shoulder, and he spun around to meet an enormous, green, ugly, and frightful creature with undulating skin, as though he were overly fat or dressed in a loose gray tunic. He would go on to describe them as having large yellow triangles for eyes and points on either side of their faces. He sprinted away, and as he made it back to his car, a massive UFO rose up from behind the house. It began to glow and blasted him with a wave of heat before it disappeared completely. Zanfretta radioed his dispatcher for help. He was rambling and in shock when they found him, saying of his attackers, "No, they aren't men. They aren't men. My God, are they ugly." He brandished his gun at his comrades. He seemed to not know them, and they were forced to knock him to the ground. They were shocked to find out how warm his clothes were, since it was so cold and icy out. The Italian military police were sent out to the area that night after Zanfretta was rescued. They found huge prints, possibly created by the UFO's landing gear, that were 9 feet in diameter and horseshoe-shaped. A staggering 52 citizens reported seeing the large UFO around the area of the home at the same time Zanfretta claimed to have seen it. During the course of the investigation, Zanfretta's credibility was further increased by the amount of people who came forward in defense of his character. A member of the press found it hard to believe a family man with a stable career and obvious hate for his newfound fame would willingly make up a story that would cost him so much. However, public opinion was against him. He would go on to say to a reporter named Di Stefano, "People call me on the phone at all hours to play jokes on me. I don't know what it was that I saw, but I saw it. I am not a liar. If I could have, I wouldn't have reported my experiences, now that I see the consequences." Those words echo modern-day sentiments from many abductees. They often lament talking about what happened to them because of the backlash they receive from not only strangers, but their own family at times. So in an attempt to shed some light on what happened, on December 23rd, Zanfretta agreed to be hypnotized. Dr. Moretti, a member of the Italian Association for Medical Hypnosis, put him under. Under hypnosis, Zanfretta revealed that the aliens had also abducted him and had taken him into a strange, hot room filled with light. There they communicated with him through a glowing device. He found that the strange mouthpieces they wore allowed them to breathe while on Earth, and that they were from a planet called Titonia, somewhere in the 3rd galaxy. The interrogation lasted some time, and the creatures revealed that they wanted to speak more and would soon arrive in greater numbers. 3 days after his session with Moretti, Zanfretta claimed to have been abducted again. This time he said that his car was overtaken and controlled remotely. He was driven through a tunnel before a bright light flooded the car. His dispatch claimed that he called in at the same time in a very controlled voice, saying, "The car has stopped. I saw a bright light. Now I am getting out." Hours later, he was found by 2 other guards out in a field by his car and in a heavy rain. Zanfretta was weeping, crying out, "They say I must leave with them. What about my children? I don't want to. I don't want to." The military police were called and found to their confusion that Zanfretta's clothes were completely dry despite the rain, and that the roof of his car was as hot as an oven. Shocking to them as well were the 20-inch boot prints that surrounded the car. A full report was filed on January 3, 1979, and labeled "Report on the Sighting of Unidentified Flying Objects" by Zanfretta. The military police went on to say that the reliability of these events actually occurring was good. After this, Zanfretta began to receive even more attention and scrutiny. He was examined by neurologist Dr. Giannotti, who found that the man is in a state of shock, but he is perfectly sane. This, however, did little to stop the harassment, so he once again agreed to undergo hypnosis, but this time he allowed it to be televised. In this session, Zanfretta claimed that the device they used to speak with him was a glowing helmet, and it caused him a great deal of pain. They took his gun and fired it. Some would speculate in an effort to see if human weaponry could hurt them. They expressed an interest in taking him with them, to which he responded with, "I know that you need me, but I don't want to. I like to be alone. I have 2 children. I feel good this way. And after all, you are not human beings. You are horrible." Hundreds watched, but the scrutiny only increased further. Eventually things died down, until he was abducted yet again. Zanfretta and his motorcycle were found on the summit of Mount Fosse. None of the locals had seen him drive up the only road that led to the top. This time, Zanfretta insisted that he be given sodium pentanol, the truth serum. Under it, he claimed that he had been picked up by a green light. The doctor who administered the drug confirmed to the press, "No human being can knowingly lie while under treatment." So I think it's very possible that Zanfretta had these encounters. It was not known at the time just how malleable a person's perception becomes while under sodium pentanol, even allowing for the implantation of false memories. One of the reasons it is no longer used as a truth serum. His 4th abduction was not an encounter that he would have alone. After he disappeared in December of 1979, 4 members of a security company were sent to find him. They found instead a strange glowing cloud which shot out 2 beams of light at their cars, killing the engines. One of them shot at the UFO, which then went dark and faded out of sight. The encounter proved too much for another, who later ended his own life. Now for some crazy stuff. As if it weren't off the wall enough, Zanfretta says that while filling up his car with gas after the last encounter, a strange man came up to him. The man supposedly was bald with an egg-shaped head and wearing a checkered suit with a chest plate made of steel. The man's voice compelled him to follow, and he was shown a ship filled with strange beings in jars. Some frog-shaped, others more bird-like or even similar to a caveman. The being tried to give him a spear that would allow humanity to know who they were and how they lived. He was instructed to give the gift to Dr. J. Allen Hynek in America, who was a prominent UFO researcher at the time. Zanfretta did not do this, however, and instead claimed to have buried the object somewhere else. His last hypnosis session with Dr. Moretti was the oddest session of all. He made strange sounds, spoke in an unknown language, and said things like, "Question with negative answer, Tixel." You can't work out anything in a case like this. To believe or not to believe doesn't mean anything. Each thing in its own time. That was the last encounter Zanfretta would have with the beings, but his description of the man in the checkered suit echoes a being encountered by others. In November of 1966 in West Virginia, a Woodrow Derringer had an encounter with a strange vehicle pouring flames from both ends and shaped like a lamp. A smiling man stepped out and spoke to him without moving his lips. Claimed his name was Indrid Cold. He was bald with an egg-shaped head and wanted to know more about UFO sightings in the area. The same man was spotted by 2 boys behind a fence, where he was dubbed the Grinning Man, and was seen in Point Pleasant around the same time as the Mothman sightings. I have a theory that this Grinning Man may in fact be a man in black. Reports of them indicate that they have shockingly similar builds. Bald, fancy suits, asking and talking about UFO encounters, always giving off an otherworldly feel. And they disappear as quickly as they arrive. Thanks for listening. Stick around with that subscribe button. If you enjoyed yourself, feel free to leave a like. It really does help. You can follow me on Facebook and all the usual places in the description. See you next time.
You need not fear me. I wish to communicate. I come as a friend. We know of you all. I come in peace. I wish medical assistance. I need your help.
These are the strange, fragmented words a man named Jennings Frederick claimed to have heard from the mouth of a monstrous creature Frederick was a bow hunter, and on a hunt outside Fairmont, West Virginia, on a hot day in 1968, he first heard an odd sound. This sound, like a high-pitched jabbering, a record running at exaggerated speed, would lead him to an event that would change his life. Frederick came across the creature, which he described as being much taller than himself, but as skinny as a stalk of a river reed. Its body was skeletal and green, as if a blade of grass, but its eyes were a large, sickly yellow. From its hands stretched out thin, impossibly long fingers that ended in wide suction cups. From the cups were needle-like thorns. It spoke those words to him in that same fast-paced jabbering before lunging at him and sticking those thorns deep into his hand. The creature was strong, and as blood was drained from his body, those eyes began to flash yellow to red in such a way that Frederick felt hypnotized. The pain went away the longer he held the strange, plant-like creature's gaze. Then, as abruptly as it attacked, the vegetable man shot off and up a hill at inhuman speeds. Not long after that, Frederick heard a deep humming, which he later concluded must have been the entity's ship taking off. Frederick kept this account a secret from everyone until he finally broke down and told the story to a man named Gray Barker. My own take on this possible encounter is one of non-commitment. There was never another sighting of any creature that even comes close to this thing since the original in 1968. In my opinion, there isn't really much to go on to form an opinion either way. In any event, this odd case of West Virginia's vegetable man is an interesting addition to our increasingly strange world. Thanks for listening. Stick around with that subscribe button. If you enjoyed yourself, feel free to leave a like. It really does help. You can follow me on Facebook and all the usual places in the description. See you next time.